Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you once again for tuning in this week to Pure Fight Radio. I would first of all like to thank you for tuning in this week, and I would like to apologize for no show last week for those of you who do tune into our show every week. Once again, I just want to say thank you. We really do appreciate it. Manny and I come on here once a week and talk about all of the topics in the sport of mixed martial arts, all the hot topics, the trending topics, talk about recent fights that have happened, talk about upcoming fights, give our predictions for upcoming fights, and ultimately we would just like to say thank you very much for tuning into our show every week. For those of you who do tune in, unfortunately we were not able to put out a show last week, and I do want to apologize about that. Unfortunately, Manny and I had some scheduling issues. Manny is starting a brand new job here very shortly, I think in the next couple weeks. So I think next week might be his last show for a little bit. I'm not 100% sure, so don't quote me on that. But I know he's going to be taking a little hiatus once he begins his new job, because it is an on and off job. He works for a certain amount of weeks, he's off for a certain amount of weeks, he works, he's off, he works, he's off, and it's a marketing job, so I'm very, very happy for him, very proud of him. I work in marketing as well, so we both kind of do the same thing. So whenever we get some free time, we come on here and talk mixed martial arts. And mixed martial arts, it's a sport we both really love. It's a sport that we've fallen in love with over the past few years. Not past few years, but past several years, almost close to a decade now. And once again, we really just do appreciate those of you who consistently come and tune into our show every week. We really do appreciate it, and we were very sorry that we weren't able to put up a show last week. So here I am this week. I'm running solo. Unfortunately, once again, Manny is busy in terms of starting the new job. You know, he's got a lot of scheduling issues himself. He's trying to, put everything together before he starts work. So I don't blame him at all, and I apologize if you prefer Manny over me for the next few weeks. After I know Mandy's going to be on next week for our UFC 211 prediction or preview show that we're going to have. I know he will be on then. I'm not sure about afterward, and that he'll be able to clarify more so on next week's show. And we might try to go ahead and have an extra guest on next week. Maybe Evan, one of our good friends, Tim as well, could be on here. Maybe Dylan might pop up on here. So we'll go ahead and see. But until then, I'm going to go ahead and fly solo this episode. There hasn't been too much in the world of mixed martial arts in terms of fighting that has happened over the past few weeks. The last really significant fight that happened in the world of mixed martial arts, or at least card, was Cub Swanson versus Artem Lobov. The only real takeaways from that were the fact that Artem Lobov survived 5 rounds against Cub Swanson, and he did a pretty decent job surviving and hanging in there with a guy like Cub. And I've got to be honest, I didn't watch the fights live. I still haven't really watched the fights. I've seen highlights of the main event. I saw the Mike Perry knockout, which was insane, and I'm happy that Jake Ellenberger is at least okay. I also saw the Iaquinta knockout over Diego Sanchez, which is something that Manny and I both kind of saw going that way. We were just kind of unsure because of Iaquinta's long layoff. Obviously, they didn't have too big of a factor on that fight, as Iaquinta got the job done in about 90 seconds. And that kind of leads me into what I want to talk about today. So, Iaquinta, the biggest news that has happened in the world of mixed martial arts, and specifically UFC, over the past couple weeks since that fight night, has been Iaquinta for about last week. The majority of the week was all about Iaquinta. He came out and he was very vulgar and very bold in his statements in terms of his opinions on the UFC and his opinions on Dana White. And let me see if I can go ahead and pull up a quote from Iaquinta, because he had some very outlandish things to say. And I don't necessarily blame him, though. He's had a lot of complaints, basically saying, F Dana White, F the UFC, where's my fight, not my fight bonus, but where's my performance of the night bonus? This is the last, I KO'd a guy last fight as well. I didn't get my performance of the night bonus. This is ridiculous. I make more money selling real estate. Then he started promoting himself as a realtor. And if he's making more money in real estate, that really speaks to me in terms of how much these fighters are really making. And it obviously has become more evident and become more public over the past few years, or the past multiple years, in terms of how much these fighters are actually making. And thank you to Conor McGregor for kind of exposing that and saying, we should get paid, this or that. I'm going to get paid, and I'm going to get all of you bums paid as well. And at the end of the day, he kind of has done that. And I'm going to touch on Conor McGregor in a little bit. But Iaquinta had some things to say. And this one quote, he said something about Joe Silva that just changed my outlook and everything. God forbid I take this fight, $26,000. I win, I lose, whatever happens. Say I get hurt somehow, I got nothing. I'd have to take off from my time for my clients. I'd have to take off time with the real estate that I'm learning. I kind of got myself in a groove. To stop that, to take a fight where I could be risking everything is just not worth it for the amount of money they're going to pay me. It would be great to say that I fought at a Madison Square Garden, but after a while, you're just saying that. There's nothing to show for it. And basically, that's why I took a stance. That's why I took the stance that I took. Interesting wording from Iaquinta, and it's a tough one because there's nothing I'd love to do more than fight at MSG. I feel like to not even have a negotiation and things I heard UFC matchmaker Joe Silva say to my manager about me when he asked just to negotiate, F him, F this. Who is he to put a price tag on what my life is worth, on what my knee is worth? I've had 2 knee surgeries already. I may have to have another one after 9 more fights. So, and that was just a very small gist of what Iaquinta had to say about the UFC. That's just a small little statement he had about Joe Silva that I pulled up. That was a site that I visited yesterday. But basically, he's coming out and saying that, he can make more money in real estate. Why should I go out there and risk my life, risk my, well-being for not that much money when I could really just work in real estate, work with my clients, do what I'm doing, and make probably the same amount of money, if not possibly more, depending on how things go. So he's reached that point of no return with the UFC and with the sport of mixed martial arts. He obviously doesn't care if he fights anymore. After the fight with Diego Sanchez, he said, I don't really care if I fight anymore. I'm basically I'm gonna go back to real estate unless the UFC can come at me with something that is worth my time and coming back. Great. If not, then I'm gone. So he's taken this route very seriously in terms of he has actually gone out of his way to bash the UFC all over Twitter. He's actually doing kind of a Donald Trump impersonation on Twitter. It's really funny the way he's doing it. He's basically saying, he's been calling out Mike Perry, Kevin Lee, Sage Northcutt, Reebok, Dana White, basically everybody. He even tweeted at Dana White in the UFC. He was like, cut me, you sissies. I thought that was hilarious. And I think Iaquinta's Raging Iaquinta, he's really living up to his nickname, has a lot of good points in terms of what he is saying about this or that with the UFC. They don't get paid enough. Why should I go out there and risk my life for something that if I'm not going to get paid enough for it when I can go sell real estate for virtually the same amount of money? I'm a professional athlete. I should get paid more. Wholeheartedly agree. The fact that he could possibly make a little bit more money fighting, maybe if he fought like 3 or 4 times a year, he could probably make a little bit more money fighting. But then you take a massive strain on your body, you take a massive health risk fighting like that when you have other options outside of the UFC. And what bothers me most about Iaquinta's raging is not Iaquinta, it's the kind of the people's response. The MMA media has kind of handled it pretty well. I think MMA media, ever since Conor McGregor has kind of come out and put his foot down and, said this or said that or said this or said that, MMA media, for the most part, responds pretty well to fighters coming out and being very vocal and being very vulgar in what they have to say about the UFC. For instance, Al's coming out here saying, F the UFC, F this, F that. And some MMA media is kind of thrown off by it. It's like, I think you're going a little too much with this. And I agree. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say that I don't think Al is going way too hard with this, because I think that he kind of is. But like I said, I really do believe he has reached that point of no return. He's reached the breaking point where he doesn't care if he fights again because he's got another job. He really does. And if the UFC isn't going to pay him what he believes he's worth, why should he fight? Why should he go out there and, risk his life to fight? These UFC fighters in general should be getting paid more. Even fighters in the undercard who are making like maybe $15,000 a fight or something, or maybe even less than that. There are guys who are fighting for chump change because that's all they know. And if Iaquinta has something else that he knows and something else that he prefers to spend his time with and dedicate his life to, and he can make the same amount of money, why should he fight? So when people come out and bash Iaquinta for bashing the UFC, I'm sitting here and I'm kind of just like, it really doesn't matter. And I'm not baffled by his approach. I'm not thrown off by his approach. I'm not disturbed by his approach. I am kind of applauding it. You know, aside from Conor McGregor, he's one of the first guys to really come out and just straight up bash the UFC. The UFC hasn't really responded yet. It was kind of funny. It was Iaquinta's birthday a little while ago after he had gone on his UFC rampage on the MMA Hour with Ariel Helwani. And they wished him a happy birthday, so I thought that was kind of funny. But it's just, it really speaks to me in terms of what the UFC is doing, what their priorities are. Do they really care about the fighters? They don't even care about starting a fighters union or anything like that. Basically anything to provide any type of health care or really care for these guys anytime in the near future. And this leads me to my next point about caring for their fighters and taking care of them in the future. Some of them they do. Some of them they truly do. A guy like Chuck Liddell, a guy like Matt Hughes, back when, you know, Dana and Lorenzo Fertitta and Joseph, all those guys were kind of at the head of everything. They took care of the guys that really, really helped the sport and really, really helped the UFC. Chuck Liddell, Matt Hughes. They try to help Rampage out. A lot of things with them and Rampage didn't really work out well. Rampage and Dana White's relationship has been up and down for the longest time now, and you know, Rampage has kind of gone out of his way to avoid the UFC, so they can't do too much with him. But plenty of like Dan Henderson, I think, has had a job with the UFC. I don't know about it anymore. I know they fired Matt Hughes, and that speaks of the WME era that is coming in with the UFC. I think should Lorenzo Fertitta and just basically everyone who was head of the UFC originally is still in the game right now, if they were still in the game, they would prevent things like this from happening as the sport grows and as fighters realize, hey, we should probably have some type of fighters union. We should probably have some type of pension plan, something for when we retire, so we know we're okay. And none of the fighters really went out of their way to do that, especially when the UFC was coming about. Because the UFC was brand new, mixed martial arts was a fairly new sport, fighters didn't really know any better, managers apparently didn't know any better either. They're just trying to make the sport bigger. And when that was happening, it was okay. But you would think around 2010-ish, maybe even earlier, that's when kind of a fighters union talk about pensions or talk about healthcare, anything like that would be brought up. And there's been multiple instances, and I can't point to ones in specific, about, you know, fighters having to pay for their own surgeries, you know, fighters having to pay for this, pay for that, pay for this, pay for that, and the UFC pays them diddly squat in return. So a fighter, what do you have to pay for as a fighter? You have to pay for your training camp, you have to pay for, you know, your training, your sparring partners, your coaches, virtually everything leading up to a fight. You got to pay if you're traveling for your training camp, you got to pay for that. You know, there's a lot of stuff that comes out of a fighter's pocket, you know, in terms of expenses and reimbursements, basically. So expenses and revenue in terms from a fighter's point of view. You can almost make an argument for, especially for the guys who fight on the undercard who don't have much of a name, they are likely spending more money than they're getting in the UFC, which is really bad. It's really sad, and it boggles my mind. And that's why I think a lot of guys are going to probably start to get thrown off by becoming mixed martial artists. They don't want to deal with that. They don't want to deal with people are getting smarter now in terms of thinking about themselves for the future. So they don't want to get involved in something that isn't going to help them out in the future unless they already help themselves out. You know, I work for a company right now, and they provide a 401k plan for me. That's not the only form of retirement plan I had. I went out of my way and got myself another retirement account, another investment accounts. So I'm taking care of myself. But some fighters, some guys might not know it. Some guys might not know about it. Some guys might not think about it. So that's when a company comes through and provides some sort of pension or for something in terms of retirement, and these guys aren't getting it. Anyway, I'm kind of getting off topic here, but in terms of taking care of fighters, that leads me into another topic, and not necessarily like a broad, out of this world topic that came out of the blue, but something that also happened this past week. For those of you who don't know, Anderson Silva came on the MMA Hour on Monday with Ariel Helwani and absolutely bashed the UFC, absolutely bashed Dana White, bashed just about everything that's currently going down in the UFC. And why am I talking about giving care for fighters and, taking care of them later on? Anderson Silva is a prime example right here and right now, and here's why. So, for one, Anderson Silva is 42 years old right now. He doesn't need to be fighting anymore. He's fighting because he loves to fight. He's honestly doing the UFC some favors. Actually, a lot of favors. Is he as big of a draw as he used to be? Absolutely not. He's over the hill. He's over the hill. He is. He's past his prime, clearly. He's older. He's 42 years old. He's obviously not the same guy he was back in 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013. He's not the same guy anymore. His prime lasted. He had maybe a tiny bit of his prime left. I think the last bit of it I saw was against Michael Bisping. And even then, it kind of wasn't all the way there. That's when he had already turned 40. And he's, obviously older now, and he's not the same fighter. So, when a guy like Anderson Silva comes in on 48 hours notice to fight Daniel Cormier at UFC 200 and virtually save the pay-per-view, saved it. And we treat him like this. Does that make sense? From a management standpoint, from an owner standpoint, from a professional standpoint, does it make sense? No. And when I speak about caring and taking care of guys like Anderson, here's what I'm talking about. Anderson gets a fight, for one, with Derek Brunson at UFC 208, which is... I still thought that was the most ridiculous matchup because who is Derek Brunson in terms of fighting a guy like Anderson Silva? Oh, they're both kind of ranked similar. Yeah, but Derek Brunson is trying to contend for a title. Anderson Silva really wasn't. And he is now, apparently. But you throw him against a guy like Derek Brunson, who doesn't have much worth. If he beats Anderson, that's fantastic for him because he has a win like that. And if Anderson loses to him, it's like, man, Anderson just lost to Derek Brunson. Why'd you feed him Derek Brunson? So he beats Derek Brunson. Questionable decision, controversial. Manny and I didn't really think so, but a lot of other people did. A lot of MMA media thought Derek Brunson won. Anyway, Kelvin Gastelum beats Vitor Belfort at one of the UFC Fortaleza. And he calls out for Anderson Silva. And the fight is made immediately. I mean, immediately. Ask and you shall receive, the UFC tweeted. I remember that. So, the fight's made. Questionable fight, once again, because Kelvin Gastelum is a 25-year-old phenom. Anderson Silva is a past his prime, 42 years old. I mean, obviously Anderson took the fight, so I can't blame the UFC too much. But they're the ones that are putting these fights together. They're the ones that are creating these matchups. They're the one that are offering the fight to Silva. So, Anderson took the fight, so, technically you could say it's his fault, but as a company, I wouldn't throw Anderson to a wolf like that. Not saying that Anderson has no chance, because Anderson definitely hangs with the top guys, but you throw him to a wolf like that, 25-year-old, guy on the come-up, who's mowing dudes down. Obviously Vitor Belfort's over the hill, and Tim Kennedy had very long layoff when he came back, but mowing dudes down, and was very competitive at welterweight, fought to a split decision, I believe, with the current welterweight champion, Tyron Woodley. Throw him to a guy like that. Of course, we all know what happened. For those of you who don't know what happened, Kelvin Gastelum, of course, ended up testing positive for marijuana in his last, I think, out of competition test for his last fight. Or, no, they don't test for marijuana out of competition. So, it was either pre-fight or post-fight. Apparently, he tested for however much marijuana. It was enough to get him suspended. So they pulled him out of the Anderson Silva fight. For one, I don't want to delve too deep into that topic because I can go on for hours about how stupid that marijuana rule is. The fact that Kelvin Gastelum, because we don't really know how high he was. Was he even high while he was fighting? Does it really matter if he smoked the night before, if he smoked 2 nights before, if he smoked after the fight? I don't understand why that's a thing. Should Kelvin Gastelum have smoked? Probably not, because he knows the rules. He knows what he needs to do. He knows what he needs to avoid. But with that being said, the fact that they had to pull him out of a fight was unreal. Kelvin Gastelum recently said that he would like to fight Anderson Silva maybe in New York sometime later this year, blah, blah, blah. Anderson wants to fight in Rio. So that happened about a month ago. Kelvin Gastelum got pulled out of the UFC 212 fight. Anderson has been offered opponents. Anderson has turned down opponents. And Anderson believes at this point in his career, he should be able to call his shots. And I'm not going to argue with him on that. The guy was the longest reigning champion in UFC history. Demetrius Johnson just tied his consecutive title defense record. But with that being said, I think all MMA fans can kind of agree that Anderson's was something different and something special. He knocked out killers at 185, went up to 205 and knocked out some killers as well. This dude was the longest reigning champion in UFC history. He is the general consensus of the MMA community, the greatest of all time, for the most part. Of course, you have arguments for Fedor, you have arguments for GSP, even some John Jones arguments in there. But with that being said, the overall general consensus, greatest of all time. So he believes he can call his own shots now. And that's fine. I'm not going to argue with him. He was offered Luke Rockhold, apparently. I believe he turned that fight down. He was offered Vitor Belfort. He turned that fight down. I don't blame him for turning down those fights. He's 42 years old. Why would he want to fight Luke Rockhold? Especially if it's not going to... if he beats Luke Rockhold, it'll probably put him right there at a title shot. But I think he realizes that he probably wouldn't beat Luke Rockhold. He doesn't want to fight Vitor again because he cherishes the moment where he knocked him out, and he doesn't want. He literally came out and said he doesn't want a fluke to kind of ruin that knockout, and I'm not mad about that. Vitor Belfort's still dangerous. He can still knock out Anderson, so I'm not too mad about that. He had stated he was thinking about a fight with Yoel Romero. He was thinking about a fight with Nate Diaz, something like that. So nothing comes about this. No fights have been offered since, I think 3 weeks ago now, back with UFC 210. I think that was the last time Anderson was being offered fights. And it was kind of hidden under the sea about Anderson and trying to get him an opponent for UFC 212. Now we're less than a month away from UFC 212. I think it happened. Let me double check. But I believe it happens on June 3rd. But let me double check just one time. Apologize, guys. But let's just see. Yes, June 3rd. So we are currently less than a month away from this fight, or from this fight card. And Anderson doesn't have an opponent. And Anderson's pissed off. Rightfully so. So he comes on the MMA Hour and absolutely destroys Dana White, destroys the UFC, comes out and basically says that, I'm pissed, this is BS, this is effing BS, I've been doing this BS job for all these years, and I get no respect, I get, nothing happened, I don't believe anything Dana White says anymore. Apparently he had said when he signed his contract back when Lorenzo Fertitta was still there, and he signed a contract. The contract apparently had stated that when George St-Pierre comes back, George St-Pierre's first fight will be against Anderson Silva. That's what the contract had said, apparently, according to Anderson. Obviously, things have played out, and that's not the case anymore. Anderson's not fighting GSP. GSP is fighting Michael Bisping for the middleweight title. And this is where things just go haywire. So Anderson Silva calls out for Yoel Romero for an interim title fight for Brazil, and basically his point of view is he doesn't want to fight Yoel if it's not for a title, because why would he want to fight Yoel if it's not for a title? He's 42 years old. Why should he fight Yoel Romero, who's a killer at 185? Anderson's draw. Yoel's the number one contender. Anderson's calling him out. Anderson wants to fight for an interim title. Yoel Romero wants it for an interim title. They both want to do this. Make it happen. Make it happen. Here's why I think they should make it happen. Your middleweight division is being held up massively. I mean, massively. Horribly. And for people who don't think the middleweight division is being held up, simple as this. You're wrong. The middleweight division is being held up. 100%. No doubt about it. Not just because Michael Bisping is fighting GSP for the middleweight title. Who, keep in mind, and I'm a little irritated. Actually, if you can't tell, I'm very irritated by this. Because GSP avoided 185 for years. Constantly, they try to put the Anderson Silva fight together for years. Didn't make it happen. GSP wanted no part of Anderson Silva. No part. And I don't blame him. Why would he? He would lose. Especially when they're both in their primes. But here's my thing. You take a 3.5-year layoff. Actually, by the time you fight, because I was trying to record this podcast last night and my computer was messing up, so I wasn't able to do it. And I'm very glad that I actually was able to record this today, as today is Friday, 6:42 Eastern Time. And George St-Pierre released a video on Twitter to Michael Bisping, ever so conveniently today when I'm trying to do this video, or this podcast. And he basically tells Michael Bisping he's going to be ready anytime after October. GSP, we are in May. This fight was announced in March. When that fight was announced, you would think July, probably, over the summer. Okay, let's get this stupid fight out of the way. Let's make it happen. Go ahead and get your pay-per-view numbers, UFC, because you haven't done anything this year. But no. You're not going to be ready until after October. So likely, a title fight in mid-November would be likely for Michael Bisping, GSP. That means the middleweight title hasn't been defended for over a year. And Michael Bisping's one defense was against Dan Henderson. Dan Henderson, keep in mind, Dan Henderson was, I don't care about the UFC's rankings, but he was ranked 12th. 12th. And Dan Henderson came off over a win over Hector Lombard. His first one in a while, aside from Tim Boach. And I'm not sure how old Dan Henderson is, but I'm going to find out right now how old Dan Henderson is. Over the hill, 46-year-old Dan Henderson got a title fight against Michael Bisping when you've got killers hanging in the wing. Yoel Romero, Luke Rockhold. At that point, Chris Weidman was in there. Jacare. I can't go any deeper. And now there's more killers. You've got Robert Whittaker hanging in the wings now, waiting. Guys who are sitting there waiting for title shots, waiting for things to happen. And you throw Dan Henderson in there because Michael Bisping wants to avenge his loss. Oh, this might do some decent pay-per-view numbers. No, it didn't. I think it might have got 300,000 buys. Might have. They're lucky. But here's my thing. Dan Henderson didn't do literally anything to deserve a title shot. Anything. He didn't do anything. Except Michael Bisping called him out because he wanted his revenge on 46-year-old Dan Henderson, which is really, really sad. You're trying to avenge your loss back in 2009. You're trying to avenge that loss 7 years later to a guy who is out of his prime, and he still almost beat you. Dan Henderson was inches away from landing the right hand in the perfect spot to put the lights out on Michael Bisping. Inches away. Maybe centimeters away. And that's Michael Bisping's only title defense. And his next one, if he's apparently going to wait, even though he came out and said, if George isn't ready by July, I'll fight Yoel, which George said, hey, I'm not going to be ready till November. And Michael Bisping hasn't said anything yet about saying, nope, we're not going to do the fight now. I'm going to fight Yoel Romero. Because he's not going to. He is going out of his way to the extreme to avoid Yoel Romero. He's going out of his way to the extreme to keep his title for as long as possible. He's even avoiding Anderson Silva. He avoided Jacare. He's going to avoid Robert Whittaker. He's going to avoid everybody. As far as I'm concerned, he hasn't given me any indication that he won't. he says, oh, I'll fight Yoel after George. Or if George isn't ready for July, thinking that George is probably going to be ready for July. If he pushed him enough, he'd be ready for July. Well, that's not going to happen now. George isn't going to be ready till November. How about you defend your title against Yoel Romero in July? Let's make that fight happen. And let's get Anderson Silva somebody. Why not? So you've got a quote-unquote champion who me and Manny both believe is a paper champion right now, because we believe any of basically the top 10, even Gegard Mousasi, didn't even mention him, will beat Michael Bisping and can beat Michael Bisping. If over the hill Dan Henderson was a few inches away from knocking out the middleweight champ in the first round, what makes me believe that any of those guys wouldn't do the same exact thing? And if Anderson Silva and Michael Bisping fought again, I would pick Anderson Silva. I would. Even at 42 years old. Even he quote-unquote lost the first fight. I'm picking Anderson. And let me go on with Anderson on why it's, in my opinion, okay for him to come out and request an interim title shot. A lot of people were thrown off by it. A lot of people said, no, I don't think this is right. I just can't see Anderson fighting for the middleweight interim title. He hasn't done enough. He's been 1-4-1 in his past God knows how many fights. Is this not the same company that threw together Anthony Pettis versus Max Holloway at the last second for an interim title because their main event fell out? Is this not the same company that did that? When Anthony Pettis was 1-3 in his last 4 fights. And Anthony Pettis had literally one win, and it was a shaky win over Charles Oliveira at 145 pounds. Is this not the same company that did that? Is this also not the same company that threw together an interim title between Khabib Nurmagomedov and Tony Ferguson, which fell through because Conor McGregor wasn't going to fight for a while? And people are saying, oh, the middleweight title is being defended. There's a fight scheduled. Well, guess what? Now that fight's not happening until November. And guess what also? That middleweight title is being defended against a guy who's never fought at 185 pounds. Never has fought. I don't care what he's done at 170. He should come back and get a 170-pound title shot. Have him fight Tyron Woodley. Please. Be my guest, because I think Tyron Woodley would destroy GSP right now. No offense to GSP. I do like GSP. But when you come in after when he fights again, it'll be 4 years since he fought. You come in after a 4-year long layoff and get a title shot at a weight class you've never fought at before because you think you can beat the champion right now because it's Michael Bisping and you want to be a 2-time world champion. Well, yeah, GSP is going to jump at that, but that's when the UFC decides as an organization, as a company with merit, and a company that built themselves. They built themselves to where they're at right now based on merit and making the right fights. Making the fights that people want to see, not fights for pay-per-view buys, not fights to sell the most. They weren't making freak show fights that didn't make sense to sell the most. Now they are. They're completely doing that. They're making random titles. They're making random interim titles. It made the random 145-pound women's title, which God knows what's going to happen. Chris Cyborg's sitting there waiting for Jermaine Durandamy to defend the title, and now Jermaine Durandamy is talking about retiring because she doesn't want to fight Cyborg. And now the UFC has gotten him in this giant mess because they wanted to book GSP versus Michael Bisping. They wanted to book GSP versus Michael Bisping. Okay, do it. Fine. Where's the fight? Let's have it happen in November. So that means by the time Michael Bisping probably defends that title against one of the top contenders, if he beats GSP, the fight happens probably mid 2018. So that's about 2 years without a legitimate top 185-pound contender fighting for the title. I don't care if you're selling pay-per-views or what. Yoel Romero and Michael Bisping have beef. That fight could sell. That fight will sell as long as you market it right. The thing is, I almost feel like the UFC is sitting back okay with the fighters. Hey, these guys need to market themselves. We're going to do very minimal marketing for this, for these guys who are really good coming up and winning fights. We're not going to promote them. We're going to let them promote themselves because we're stupid and we don't know how to create stars. We're going to use the stars that we have to make these dumb fights that don't make any sense, so they'll sell some pay-per-views. And I'm sitting over here like, how did you become popular? How did the UFC become popular and become the organization it is today? How? Based off of fights with merit. Based off of making the fights that made sense. The number one contenders fought each other. They didn't have a ranking system. They didn't have any of that. They had, okay, this guy's on this win streak. He's ready for a title shot. It's obvious that he's next in line. And guess what? They would market it. They would market the fight. Sometimes the guys would talk. And if they talked, they made the fight bigger. Now you don't have that. Ever since Conor McGregor came in and started talking this and talking that and promoting himself, great job. Thank you, Conor McGregor, for promoting yourself. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. He has really brought up the issue of fighter pay, not on purpose, but just because he has requested this amount of money and he's gotten this popular and he's gotten paid. So the UFC's got to pay him. And the UFC's got to pay guys like Nate Diaz because him versus Nate Diaz are the two top pay-per-view sellers ever, I believe, in UFC history. The top two, 196 and 202. Those guys together create a great fight. And Conor's over here trying to box Floyd, so the 155-pound title is being held up. So you've got Nate Diaz coming on the MMA Hour, and he's talking this, talking that, and people are like, Diaz is complaining again. But Diaz makes entire sense. Diaz comes on, and he's like, hey, they offered me Tony Ferguson. I didn't get the pay I wanted, so I'm not going to fight Tony Ferguson. Make me want to fight you. And while, Nate is, saying he's the superstar, he's the golden child, blah, 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 he's kind of talking out of his ass, I think, right there. But Nate had some really good points. And I know I got off topic from what I was talking about with GSP and Anderson and Bisping. But Nate obviously did come on the MMA Hour with Ariel Helwani and had an hour-long show. And talked about basically, what's going on with him, why he hasn't been accepted a fight, why he hasn't really been offered a fight that's pleasing to him. And, if Nate's good in terms of financially, if he's financially good, why should he accept a fight right now? That doesn't entice him. He made a great point. If he's in the cafeteria and his friends are saying, hey man, why don't you go fight that guy over there? Why do I want to fight him? He hasn't said anything to me. It's the same exact thing. He called out Conor. He enticed Conor for the fight. And that was huge. That beef was huge. And it still is huge. There's a third fight to make with that. As much as I thought the second fight shouldn't have been made, it was the highest pay-per-view in UFC history. They're 1-1, and you can make an argument Diaz might have won that second fight. Make the third fight. Make something happen. The UFC is going down a route that is highly irritating, especially for somebody who's followed the UFC since 2008, 2009. I've been following the sport for a long time. Once again, how did the UFC become popular and become the organization they are today? How? Based off making the right fights and putting guys who deserve title shots in there. They didn't make random interim titles. The only time they made interim titles was when the champion was out for a while. Brock Lesnar, he was out for a while. They made a heavyweight title, interim title. Frank Mir had been out for a while, a long time ago, and they made an interim title. Dominic Cruz, they made an interim title, and then Renan Barão became the champion because Dominic Cruz has been injured the whole time. They gave people chances. Now because Conor McGregor decided to bounce from 145 to 155 to, be the champ, you've got guys calling for stuff that doesn't make sense. You got Tyron Woodley out here calling for Nate Diaz, who hasn't won a fight in years, and hasn't fought in 2 years now. And the last fight he had was against Anderson Silva, and he lost. It was a no contest. But You got Tyron Woodley out here calling for Nate Diaz. You've got GSP coming back, trying to fight Michael Bisping. So that's why I'm not mad that Anderson wants this 185-pound interim title. Go ahead and make it. You know, if you're set on making these random titles and random interim titles, go ahead and make it. Because the middleweight division is being held up more than any other division right now. Aside, middleweight and lightweight are the two that are being held up. And thank God Conor McGregor relinquished the damn featherweight title, or else that would have been held up right now. But Conor didn't want to defend the featherweight title. He didn't want to defend it. He didn't want to fight Frankie Edgar. Oh, they according to him, these guys need to do more to entice me to fight. According to Conor, you're the champ. You are the champ, okay? You've never defended a title in your life. You haven't. You've won a title, and then you try to win another title. Conor is always in a position where it's okay if he loses. And that's in him reaching for this and reaching for that, which I appreciate to an extent. But the UFC has to understand that Dana White and everyone at the top has to understand if you give one guy leeway like that, all the other fighters who are champs are going to want the same leeway. Tyron Woodley wants to fight this guy. Why don't you let him fight him? If you're going to let Conor do what the hell he wants. Nate Diaz wants this. Let him have it. Anderson Silva, who's done so much for the company, let him have it. If you're going to let Conor do whatever the hell he wants, if you're going to let Conor McGregor literally step outside of his contract and fight Floyd Mayweather in boxing, when you wouldn't let Anderson do it for years, he wanted to fight Roy Jones Jr. There's many other MMA fighters who wanted to box or wanted to, do this or do that. You wouldn't let them do it. But you're going to let Conor do it because he's Conor. The UFC needs to get their shit together. At the end of the day, they do. 100%, they need to get their shit together. And, I'm in no position to say what they should or shouldn't do because I'm not a person who's looking at their numbers financially, accounting-wise. I'm not looking at any of that. I don't have access to those numbers. The numbers on the internet, I'm sure they're only partially true. For the most part, I'm sure they're pretty true. And if I was to really do research in terms of how much WME spent to buy the company, in terms of how much they have to make back to break even, this or that, maybe I'd understand more. But history repeats itself. Follow the formula that got you there. Follow the formula that got the UFC where it is today. The problem is, in 2014, the UFC had a horrible year. You know why? Because their stars went away. Anderson Silva went away, Chuck Liddell retired, GSP retired. All you had was John Jones and Ronda Rousey. Conor McGregor wasn't on his way up yet. BJ Penn's retired. Rampage Jackson's virtually done with his career. Rashad Evans, MIA. A bunch of these, Brock Lesnar's gone. A bunch of these guys who sell pay-per-views, who are stars of the sport, kind of depleted or just kind of fell off, aside from John Jones and Ronda Rousey. And this is before Ronda really got big. 2015 was the year Ronda got huge. And then Conor started getting big. The end of 2015, 2016 is when Conor got huge. So now you've got two megastars. Now you don't have a Ronda Rousey anymore. And now you have a Conor McGregor who is trying to box Floyd Mayweather. Create your stars. You have plenty of stars. You have plenty of stars in the making. And you don't care about them. You want to make money right now. You're not thinking about the future. You're not thinking about, putting the right fights that make sense together. Sometimes they will. Sometimes they will put the right fights together. A lot of the times they won't. And Michael Bisping versus GSP is a prime example. And if I'm running the UFC, I scrap that fight because GSP is not going to be ready for a while. I'd throw together Michael Bisping versus Yoel Romero because that's a fight that makes sense. And that's the fight that should have happened a long time ago. The fight should have been scheduled a long time ago. It wasn't. So, but if the UFC is not going to do it, if they're content and they're okay with Michael Bisping versus GSP, and if they're going to keep on going with it, even though GSP is not going to fight, be ready till probably mid-November. Possibly even later. If they're okay with that, please do something. Create an interim middleweight title. If Anderson Silva is demanding it, even though he probably shouldn't be fighting for the title, if you're putting together Anthony Pettis versus Max Holloway for an interim title, Put this together. If you're creating Holly Holm versus Jermaine Durandamy for the vacant featherweight women's title, make this happen. You understand, putting that fight on the line as a co-main event on UFC 212 sells more pay-per-views. Anderson Silva, 42 years old or not, sells pay-per-views. The UFC 200 show would probably not have done 1 million pay-per-view buys had Anderson not stepped up last minute. It wouldn't have. But I digress my case. I think I've said quite a bit on this show today, and I've gotten my views out and opinions out, and I appreciate you guys tuning in. And that's pretty much the show for this week. And once again, I do apologize. Me and Manny do apologize for not putting together a show last week. We're really trying to put together consistent content, but we do have lives outside of this. So we're trying to get this, rolling, as well as we're trying to get our professional lives rolling as well. And we do believe this is kind of part of our professional lives, but it's kind of a hobby as well. So we're trying to put everything together in terms of the show, and I think we will. It just comes down to getting a regular schedule down, and I truly do believe we will. And I keep saying I'm going to create a Facebook page and keep doing this, and I promise you I'm going to, and I promise you this is going to become a regular thing. Unfortunately, I'm getting used to a new job as well, so a lot of stuff is going on. Manny's getting a new job, Manny's starting a new job, a lot is going on, so we're just trying to put everything together. We're trying to get a regular schedule going. We're trying to get this stuff together, so please be patient with us, bear with us. We will be back. We will be back for UFC 211 next week. We will break down the main event, all the other fights, because this is a stacked card. I think it's 14 fights on this sucker. And there are some crazy good matchups for once with the UFC. Thank you. The UFC 211 is the best card the UFC has put together for 2017, by far. And by far the fights that have made the most sense. Still does not make up for GSP versus Michael Bisping, or any of the other crap you've done since WME has bought the company. But I digress once again. Thank you so much, guys, for tuning in this week. If you've watched this show, please leave your comment below. Let us know what you think about these situations. Let us know what your beliefs are, what you think the UFC should do. Should they keep Michael Bisping, George St-Pierre rolling? Should they do something else? Please leave your thoughts and opinions. Let us know what you think. We really do appreciate your feedback. Please critique us as well. We're here for open criticism. Once again, I am Brent Cristelli. You can find me on Twitter at bcristelli11. You can also find me on Instagram at bcristelli11. You can find me on Facebook at Brent Cristelli, of course. And please follow our Twitter account, which is at Pure Fight Radio. I also do have a YouTube channel. I have a couple highlight videos on there. I've got a... You can watch my Daniel Cormier versus John Jones preview, because that's actually relevant now. I should probably update that video, but there's a preview up there if you want to get hyped for the fight that's going to come up at UFC 214. And there's also a Vince Carter highlight video, should you be a fan of basketball. And with the NBA playoffs in full form right now, you guys can go ahead and watch that old-time Vince Carter highlight reel. But happy Friday, you guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. And if you are tuning in, we really do appreciate it, and we hope you guys have a great weekend, and please stay tuned for our prediction video or preview show next week for UFC 211. Thank you so much. Hope you have a great weekend. Enjoy the fights. We'll see you next time.